Headliner Nation, what's going on? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Time to dive into my wide receiver start and sit analysis for week 6 of the NFL season. Hopefully we're leaving some of this randomness and craziness behind us moving forward. We've had to deal with a lot of injuries this year, and of course COVID tests have been causing quite the stir among our rosters. Hopefully we're starting to get some of that figured out, and the rest of the season can be a little bit more like the norm. Nothing about 2020 is going to be the norm, but hopefully the rest of the season we can start to move past some of these issues and feel a lot better about our rosters. Now, before we jump into the analysis for week 6, we got to bounce it back to week 5 and take a look at the numbers from last week. And here they are. Toss them up on the screen. Last week, my wide receiver, 73% overall. You can see some of the hits there. Crowder, Nelson Aguilar. I said I had that feeling he was going to go for the touchdown last week, and he did it. DJ Moore ended up having a good game. Over on the misses side, man, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson going down with that injury. Claypool has a huge day. And, it's just Brandon Cooks, man. Brandon Cooks getting into the game plan. It was nice to see. It was 73% overall last week. Back over 70% for the second week in a row. That's what I love to see. That's the target every single week. So let's go ahead and jump into week 6 and see if we can do it for a third straight week. First game of the week is not on Thursday night this week, which is a little bit different than what we've seen in years past. We're going to have to wait until Sunday for football, but that's all right. We're going to jump into Denver and New England, the first game on Sunday. For Denver, Jerry Jeudy is going to be a sit for me. Get Stephon Gilmore this week. Not really loving that matchup. However, with Tim Patrick, I'm going to roll with Tim Patrick this week as a start. He's got a touchdown in the last 2 games. And 2 weeks ago, when Denver played, I thought to myself, I'm kind of feeling Tim Patrick a little bit. And I didn't put him as a start, and I should have done it. So I'm going to follow my gut this week and think that he gets a little bit of work and enough to be a start. KJ Hamler will end up being a sit for me as well. On the New England side, Denver does allow the 5th most fantasy points per game, and that's part of the reason I'm going to start Julian Edelman. But not only start Edelman, start N'Keal Harry this week as well. He's averaging 7 targets a game right now. Definitely could see him going for a touchdown in this matchup at home. Cam Newton should be back and ready to roll, and if he is, definitely could see these guys putting up some decent numbers. Houston and Tennessee, and Houston looked like a completely different team without Bill O'Brien on offense. They were doing a lot of different things, some pre-snap motions, getting some guys moving around on the line of scrimmage a little bit. Definitely looked like an offense that had a little bit of a rejuvenation in it with no Bill O'Brien there, which was good to see for them. Fuller and Cooks are going to be starts for me this week. They combined for 19 targets last week. Brandon Cooks had the huge week last week, but Fuller also had a good week, scored a touchdown. Definitely think both of these guys can coexist, especially when they're going up against teams like Tennessee, who are probably, they're coming off 41 points this past week. They're going to be able to throw the ball around a little bit as well. So Fuller and Cooks will both be starts for me. Stills and Cobbs will be sit. A.J. Brown's going to go ahead and be a start for me this week. Last week, didn't really love it on his way back from being injured. However, no Tre'Davious White, game time decision. He's done. Yeah, of course we had to get A.J. Brown in the lineup, and he went off for a huge game. Going up this week against Houston, we're going to get him back in the lineup again. Part of the reason, too, is Corey Davis and Adam Humphries. Will they end up being back next week? Not 100% sure with the COVID testing and them being positive. If they will definitely be back next week. For right now, I'm going to list them both as sits until I know a little bit more about them. We'll keep an eye on that, and if things change over the course of the week, I'll try to update you all, especially in the rankings, and then let you know what those updated numbers look like. Cleveland takes their winning record into Pittsburgh, and this could be a statement win for them. One of those wins that really help kind of turn a franchise around. They're on the right way right now. Kevin Stefanski, an excellent hire for them. If they can go into Pittsburgh and get a dub in week 6, it could be one of those wins that really help propel them to a strong rest of the season. And who knows, maybe even more than that. In this game, expect a shootout this week. Cleveland and Pittsburgh combined for 91.36 fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. So they're giving up a ton of points to wide receivers right now. So for Cleveland, OBJ and Landry are going to be a start for me. OBJ, obviously, him and Baker Mayfield have had a much better connection. Had a huge week a couple of weeks ago. Last week, even though it was a little bit more of a tougher matchup for him, he still played well against Indianapolis. This could definitely be another boom game for him and Landry. Pittsburgh slot cornerbacks allow 2.15 yards per snap. That is the second most in the NFL. So slot wide receivers have had some pretty decent success going up against Pittsburgh so far this season. On Pittsburgh's side of the ball, that is where we have our Manscaped must start of the week in Juju Smith-Schuster. So for Juju, a lot of people right now are taking a look at Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson over the first few weeks of the season. Claypool had the big week last week. Juju hasn't really had a whole lot of talk about him yet because people still don't feel like he's putting up the numbers that he used to. He hasn't played that bad yet this year. But listen to this, going up against Cleveland this week, and again, kind of maybe a battle of the slot wide receivers because neither team can cover the slot that well. Cleveland cornerbacks that play in the slot have allowed 28 receptions on 32 targets, 272 yards, 134 of those coming after the catch. So, both of these teams struggle against the slot, and Juju can smash out of the slot. Now, part of the question is, will Deontay Johnson be healthy this week? I'm not 100% sure, but Juju's going to be my Manscaped must start of the week. Don't forget, you head to manscaped.com. You can get 20% off all of their awesome items there by using code Headliners, all capital letters, manscaped.com. For Chase Claypool, he is going to be a start because I don't know if Deontay Johnson is going to be healthy or not. But this really feels like a big game for him. Again, another week, some more big plays. I said in the waiver wire episode, go get Chase Claypool. Just keep in mind that he could be a little bit more boom or bust. In these matchups, he's definitely more boom. If he were facing a tougher defense, he'd be a little bit more bust. But I think he can come out and have another good week. Is he going to score 4 touchdowns again? Probably not. But he could still have a really good week, and he could help win you your Week 6 matchup. Baltimore and Philadelphia, and there's really not a whole lot of starts in this matchup. I am going to roll with Marquise Brown as a start again this week. Philadelphia is allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but everyone else is going to be a sit just because there isn't a whole lot of volume going to the other guys. It's Marquise Brown, it's Mark Andrews, and then really after that, it's running the football an awful lot and spreading out a few targets here or there to other guys. So none of the wide receivers outside of Marquise Brown are really fantasy relevant right now. For Philadelphia, I am going to list all of their wide receivers as sits this week. I'm just not feeling this matchup. I just don't think Carson Wentz is playing well enough right now. I think the offensive line is too banged up. They don't have enough wide receivers right now that are playing that are healthy or playing well. Zach Ertz hasn't been playing well. I mean, it's just a whole mess of things on the offensive side of the ball. So really this week, a week when maybe you would target like a Greg Ward. Yeah, Fulgham came off the waiver wire for a lot of you last week. I'd hold on to him, but this week is just not feeling like the matchup in which you would start any of those guys. Washington and the Giants this week, and for Washington, Terry McLaurin's going to be a start for us. There was a lot of people concerned about him last week with Kyle Allen. Kyle Allen ended up going down with the injury. Alex Smith finishes out the game. Terry McLaurin still saw 7 targets last week. He's still one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he's getting a good matchup here. Kyle Allen is going to be the starter this week. They've already announced that. Hopefully when he comes back this week, he settles into a little bit more of a groove. He doesn't get hurt again or doesn't end up going out with an injury if that's still bugging him, and he can stay in the game. Part of the reason might have been with Alex Smith, maybe just a little hesitant. Maybe they weren't really going after some of those routes that Terry McLaurin was running. Obviously, your first game back after what he's experienced. Congratulations to him for working his way back, and that was awesome to see. It just might not be the best for fantasy purposes for some of those wide receivers there. So I'm still going to roll with Terry McLaurin as the only start for Washington because he's still seeing plenty of volume and he's still smashing in really good matchups. For the Giants, I'm going to go ahead and sit everybody for New York this week. Washington is still allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers right now. Daniel Jones has not been that good this year. He is really off right now. The whole offense as a whole is off, to be honest with you. I mean, they've lost a lot of weapons. The offensive line still is not that good. It just doesn't feel like an opportunity for anything to click there outside of possibly Evan Ingram, but I'll talk about him again on the tight end video. But for the wide receivers this week, it's a tough matchup. Darius Slayton, I could see his ceiling be brought down a lot. Golden Tate, not really trusting him out of the slot either this week. So I'm going to go ahead and not risk it with anyone from New York. Atlanta and Minnesota, another matchup of two opposing defenses that have trouble stopping the passing game. For Atlanta, yes, they're out a head coach and they are out a GM, but that doesn't mean that they can't bring some of that offensive swag back and get rolling again. Hopefully they can do a little bit like what Houston did last week, get that offense rolling and get some feeling back and some life back into that team so they can finish out the year strong because they've got more than enough weapons to get it done. So Julio Jones, if he plays this week, he will be a start for me, and Calvin Ridley will also be a start. Bounced back last week, had a good game after putting up that donut for everybody a couple of weeks ago, but he bounces back this past week and is just fine. Minnesota allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers right now. And for Russell Gage, I'm going to go ahead and sit him because to start the year, it looked like, yeah, he's going to get more than enough targets to be fantasy viable, but it's really been an up and down season since then. So for him, instead of us worrying about whether or not we're going to start him on a weekly basis, he's going to be a sit because I think there's other options out there that have a little bit higher upside than what he does. Now, if Julio Jones ends up being out, we'll take a step back. We'll reevaluate that because then at that point, Gage probably can become a start for me. For Minnesota, going up against Atlanta, who's allowing the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, Adam Thielen will definitely be a start again this week. And Justin Jefferson, after a couple of really great performances last week, not as great, but that's okay. If you played in a PPR league, still probably at least fantasy viable for you. Unfortunately, he was a miss for me last week. Thielen and Jefferson, both my must starts last week. Thielen hit. Jefferson didn't quite get there in half PPR formats, but I'm going to go back to him as a start again this week. The matchup is just too good, and with Thielen playing as well as he is, Jefferson really breaking out those couple of games, I think he's a guy that's still going to have plenty of fantasy options moving forward. We have to keep an eye on one thing, though, and that's the tight end position. I'll talk about that more in that video, but if they start working that position in a little bit more, which they did last week, we'll have to monitor Justin Jefferson and see if he becomes more of a flex play every week instead of like a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 type play. For Detroit and Jacksonville, it's going to be nice for those of you that have been missing Kenny Golladay to get him back in the lineup. Missed some games to start the year, then you got him back, and then you missed him for the bye last week, but he's back going up against Jacksonville. He is absolutely going to be a start for me this week. Marvin Jones will end up being a sit. Yeah, maybe he could have a big game. That would be great to see him finally get rolling a little bit again, but he just hasn't really been in the game plan yet this year. And then Danny Amendola will be a start for me this week. He's going to be going up against Hayden in the slot more than likely. Hayden has quite a bit of snaps in the slot this year, top 5 in slot snaps this year, and he's also allowing 2.27 yards per snap in the slot. That is the most of any cornerback in the NFL. So he's obviously giving up a lot of points there. He's giving up a lot of yards there. Amendola, who Matthew Stafford's been looking to quite a bit so far early here in the season, could have himself a nice matchup and really maybe not blow the ceiling off of this as a fantasy performance, but definitely a guy that if he were to get anywhere between 8 and 10 targets, could reel in anywhere between 6 and 9 of those and get towards 80 to 90 yards. That could make him a start in half PPR formats, so I'm going to start him this week as well. DJ Chark, he's going to be a start for me if healthy. I haven't heard a whole lot about him yet as of this recording, so I don't really know what he's going to be looking like this week. So we're going to monitor that and keep an eye on it. As of right now, he'll be a start for me. Keelan Cole is going to be a start no matter what, because I could definitely see him taking one to the house, a big play, scoring a touchdown against that Detroit defense this week. So I will play him this week. And then Shenault will be a start for me if Chark is out. If Chark ends up being in, we'll reflect that in the rankings a little bit more and talk about that then. But right now I'm kind of on the edge. I'm going to list him as a start, but I really want to hear more about Chark and what he's going to look like. Now, if you play in a full PPR format, because he's been seeing enough volume, you can probably start him no matter what. But in a half PPR and a standard, I think we're going to be a little bit closer to those 10 fantasy points and really could go on either side of it. And that's why I'm just being a little bit wary of it right now. In full PPR, yes, absolutely. He's getting more than enough targets to be a start right now. And the other ones, still a start for me as of now, but we will evaluate as the week goes on, depending on what we hear about Chark. Cincinnati at Indianapolis, and this one might surprise you a little bit. T. Higgins will end up being a start for me this week. He has led Cincinnati in targets the last couple of weeks. But it's Tyler Boyd that you're seeing that might shock you a little bit as a sit. He's going up against Xavier Rhodes this week, who last year looked like he was done. He looked like he was cooked and he was not going to be able to return to some of the form that he had early on in Minnesota. However, this year he has found it and he is back to being that type of a lockdown corner. This year he has been targeted 21 times in the passing game and has only allowed 9 receptions. I definitely could see this as a week where Joe Burrow spreads some of those targets out a little bit and because him and Higgins have been on the same page the last couple of weeks. Higgins is not going to end up getting Rhodes. Tyler Boyd is probably going to get Rhodes. I don't even think AJ Green is going to get Rhodes because he's not really the wide receiver one on that team anymore. So Tyler Boyd gets Rhodes. Green is also going to be a sit for me. Maybe he does something, maybe he doesn't. But last week, some of the body language, the way he talked on the bench, he's just not looking that into it right now. You know, the losing and everything probably is growing on him a little bit, and he's frustrated, maybe not getting the ball as much, whatever it may be. He's frustrated right now. Until he can get his head right, get his body right, get moving forward, I'm going to list him as a sit. But to me, I think Xavier Rhodes is going to end up being on Boyd, which could shut him down, and then Higgins is the main beneficiary of that as a start for me. T.Y. Hilton will end up being a start again for me this week. He had 10 targets last week. Phillip Rivers has to throw the ball to somebody, right? Yeah, the offense isn't looking that great right now. Phillip Rivers coming off 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions against the Cleveland Browns, who haven't been that great at stopping wide receivers. But he's going to have to throw the ball to somebody. And Hilton had a decent week. You know, not a great week, not the Hilton that we're used to seeing, but still a decent week. But keep in mind right now that in the league, he is 23rd in targets, but he is 39th in yards. So the volume is there. The targets are there to make him kind of a wide receiver too. He's getting that type of volume. But when you're only 39th in yards, there's something wrong there. And what is that? How do they get him going? They're getting him the volume, but one of these weeks, you'd have to think that T.Y. Hilton is going to put it all together and move forward and be much better than what he is. Everybody else so far, though, everybody else on that team is going to end up being a sit. They're starting to get the tight ends worked into it a little bit more with 3 of those. So for the wide receivers, outside of Hilton, just not seeing a whole lot of volume right now. Chicago and Carolina this week, and Allen Robinson for Chicago is absolutely going to be a start for us. He is every single week. He's just been too good this year to leave on the bench. But for Mooney and Miller, both of those guys are going to be sits this week because the Panthers, surprisingly enough, allow the 6th fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers right now. So that defense is a lot better this year than what we anticipated, especially against the pass and limiting damage from wide receivers. Again, Allen Robinson, even what might be a tough matchup, we're going to start him because the guy's just been too good. He's a wide receiver 1 type overall. We got to have in our lineup. Just keep in mind that maybe the ceiling will be a little bit lower this week, but because the matchup is tougher, that's why we'll sit the other 2 guys. For Carolina, though, maybe this one is a little bit surprising as well, but I'm actually going to start Robbie Anderson this week and sit DJ Moore. Calvin Ridley is the only wide receiver 1 so far this year to really put together a huge performance against Chicago. And that was a week when Julio Jones was out, so it was technically a wide receiver 1 type production from him. That's the coverage that he saw. He was considered the wide receiver 1 that week. But other than that, this year, really what the Chicago Bears have done have limited damage from the wide receiver 1, and it's the wide receiver 2 that's kind of done some things. Week 1 against Danny Amendola, Marvin Jones was the wide receiver 1. Danny Amendola was the wide receiver 2, over 80 yards. A couple weeks ago against Indianapolis, T.Y. Hilton's the wide receiver 1. Zach Pascal is the guy that really goes for almost 60 yards. So it's the wide receiver 2s they've allowed a little bit of a better performance to than the wide receiver 1. Calvin Ridley, the only guy that's really done anything against them this year. For me, DJ Moore, I think he sees that wide receiver 1 coverage this week, and it's Robbie Anderson that sees the wide receiver 2 coverage. He's got 2 games with over 100 yards, another with 99. He's got 3 games with 10 plus targets this year as well. So he's playing out of his mind. He's playing a lot better than I think anyone anticipated, and this is still going to be a pretty tough matchup for this team. Chicago allows the second fewest fantasy points per game. So that is why for me, DJ Moore, I'm going to list him as a sit. I don't think the ceiling is very high for him this week, and I think we see Robbie Anderson a little bit more. And then, of course, if Christian McCaffrey is back this week, Christian McCaffrey, we get him rolling a little bit. Mike Davis will probably still be out on the field. I just don't see a whole lot of upside in DJ Moore when I see Robbie Anderson on the other side getting a little bit less coverage than him, possibly going off for a decent week. New York Jets and Miami Dolphins, and this is one of those matchups that you look at and you're like, okay, right? So, I mean, the Jets, they're getting rid of Le'Veon Bell, but they're keeping Adam Gase, which, makes no sense whatsoever. But the one thing I can say about Adam Gase is his game plan has made Jamison Crowder more than fantasy viable. Jamison Crowder right now is 3rd in the NFL in fantasy points per game for wide receivers in half PPR formats, in half, not full, in half. He's averaging over 18 fantasy points per game. And even with Joe Flacco last week, Jamison Crowder was a start for me, but he was on the lower end of my rankings, just outside the top 30 of my starts, because I was concerned that Flacco connection wasn't going to happen. It still did. So, Jamison Crowder will be a start again this week for me, and he'll be a little bit higher in the rankings. On the flip side, for Devontae Parker and the Miami Dolphins, Parker will be a start for me. He continues to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense. I'd love to start Preston Williams, but the dude will have a decent performance and disappear for weeks. And then he has another decent performance, and who knows? Maybe he disappears again against the New York Jets. I would like to list him as a start. It's a matchup that would warrant listing him as a start, but I'm just not going to risk it this week. He's been far too up and down for me so far. If the floors were a little bit higher, that's fine, but he's having weeks where he completely disappears. If his bad performances, he was still getting, 4 or 5 receptions for 50, 60 yards, I could live with that, but he's completely disappearing some weeks, and because of that, I just don't want to be risky. Green Bay and Tampa Bay, and as of right now, I'm going to operate under the assumption that coming out of the bye, Devontae Adams will be good to go and will be back in the lineup and a start for me. Now, if Adams ends up being out, we'll talk a little bit more later in the week about what we could see from the wide receivers here. Do we start MVS? Right now, anyone outside of Devontae Adams as a wide receiver is going to be a sit for me in Green Bay. Hopefully Adams gets back out there. He'll be a start, but if he's not, we'll talk about whether or not we list anyone else as a start. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this offense is difficult to call week in and week out. Tom Brady spreads the ball around so much, you just don't know what's going to happen from week to week. Chris Godwin goes out. Mike Evans, he ends up, being the wide receiver 1 last week, but is banged up. Scotty Miller's banged up, but he's in a really good position. He doesn't even end up getting a target last week. It's just week in and week out, what are you going to get from this team? Mike Evans, if he's on the field, you play him. The touchdown upside every single week is just too good to leave on the bench. So you got to play Mike Evans if you own him. So he's going to be a start for me. Just keep in mind, Green Bay is holding wide receivers to just under 35 fantasy points per game. So while Mike Evans could end up having a decent game, I'm not expecting a whole lot from Tyler Johnson, last week's breakout performer, or Scotty Miller, last week's letdown. So Evans, I'll get him in the lineup this week, but for the other guys, I'm going to skip on them. San Francisco may only allow 32 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, But the combination of Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, smack way too hard to leave them on the bench. Woods saw a huge play last week. Cooper Kupp actually saw more targets last week, just didn't quite put together that big play like Robert Woods did. So both of those guys will end up being starts this week. And I know I said Robert Woods, but you're probably confused. You don't know who that is because we call him Bobby Trees around here so much. So I don't know who Robert Woods is either. Anyway, for the San Francisco 49ers, the Los Angeles Rams allow the fewest fantasy points per game. Deebo Samuel is going to be a sit for me. Brandon Ayuk is going to be a sit for me. And Kendrick Bourne is going to be a sit for me. After that mess last week, who's going to end up being the starting quarterback? If they go back to Jimmy G, is Jimmy G actually going to perform that well against Los Angeles? If he doesn't, is he going to get pulled again? Whatever it is, this offense is a mess right now. And Jimmy G isn't getting it done. And really no one's getting it done. And going up against Los Angeles, probably no one's going to get it done this week either. KC at Buffalo, and White for Buffalo last week was a last-minute scratch. Will he end up being back in the lineup this week? It will be something to monitor. Whether or not he is, Tyreek Hill will be a start no matter what. If he plays, though, yeah, maybe White limits the upside just a little bit. But if you own Tyreek Hill, you put him in your lineup. But the question is, with Sammy Watkins nursing a little bit of an injury right now, Mecole Hardman or Robinson? It's Mecole Hardman for me. Demarcus Robinson can't really quite jump on board with him this week because Mecole Hardman has the bigger upside, the bigger play upside in and out every single week. So if I have to pick somebody, it's going to be Hardman to maybe be the guy to have that game right next to Hill and break out and have a big performance this week like we saw from him sometimes at points last season. For Buffalo, Stephon Diggs continues to be a start. The dude sees a ton of volume. He beats the best cornerbacks in the league. He's one of the best wide receivers in the league. Him and Josh Allen are on the same page. Brown, though, as of right now, he's a sit. We don't know what's going on with that hamstring. Obviously came up lame late last week and was injured. So will he be able to get back on the field for this matchup? We'll have to keep an eye on that. Gabriel Davis is going to be a sit for me as of right now. If Brown ends up being out, then we will reevaluate, and then at that point, Davis could become a start for me. And right now, Cole Beasley is a start for me because I think they're going to be able to win in the slot a little bit more often this week than what they will on the outside. But really, Brown is the key to this matchup. If he's in, maybe not, but it's going to be affecting Gabriel Davis because if Brown is in, Brown might be a sit for me no matter what, depending on his leg. But if Brown's a sit and he's in, Davis will be a sit as well. But if Davis goes in and Brown is out, then Davis can become a start at that point. So again, we'll have to track it and monitor it, and we'll talk about it later on in the week. And the last matchup of the week, Arizona and Dallas. In Arizona, we could be seeing a pretty big matchup from them this week. DeAndre Hopkins, absolutely. We're going to continue to put him in our lineup every single week. He's a top 5 wide receiver. He's one of the better wide receivers in the league right now. And the move to Arizona did absolutely nothing to him. Still is fantastic as always. Christian Kirk, however, going up against a defense that allows the third most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. We're going to get Christian Kirk in the lineup this week. He's been looking a lot better the last couple of weeks after coming back from that injury. Definitely kind of becoming that number 2 target for Kyler Murray. For Fitz and Isabella, though, both of those guys are going to be sits. For Dallas, Lamb is going to be the only start for me this week. And you say, Kyle, you're on the hashtag always Amari bandwagon. Why would you list him as a sit? Well, here's a couple of reasons. Number 1, Arizona allows the 5th fewest fantasy points in the league to opposing wide receivers. So that's number 1. Number 2, Andy Dalton's going to be taking over this game. Is the connection going to be there with Amari Cooper? We don't know. I hope it is. But CeeDee Lamb, to me, is the guy that has the easiest chance at winning. Because more than likely, CeeDee Lamb will be in the slot the entire time, so he'll probably get the best matchup. Amari Cooper's going to be on the outside if he plays, and he's going to be taking on the cornerback 1 for Arizona, Mr. Patrick Peterson himself. So that could limit Amari Cooper a little bit this week, but also Amari Cooper could be dealing with an injury right now. Last week, his lowest snap percentage of the week, played only about 60% of the snaps. Again, some of those foot issues that he had this offseason and late last year might be popping back up a little bit. So even if he does play, he might be affected to the point that he doesn't put together that big of a week. So Lamb, I will end up putting out there. Now, Michael Gallup, a lot of people are saying, hey, Gallup could end up being a big guy as well. Dalton likes to go down the field a little bit. I got to see it first, though. I got to see it. Gallup really hasn't been in the game plan. Gallup had a great connection with Dak Prescott last year, and Dak wasn't even getting him the ball this year. Will it happen again? Will they run the ball a little bit more this week, knowing that Dalton's stepping in? So for me, Lamb will be the only start for this team at wide receiver on Monday Night Football. A lot of reasons why, but Lamb should find the best position to smash this week. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Your start and sits for week 6 of the NFL season. Leave me a comment down below. Is there somebody that you disagree with? Somebody that you're starting this week? Somebody that you're sitting this week? Let me know in the comments. I'll get to as many as I can. Also, hit that like button if you appreciate the content. We always appreciate those likes. And as always, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it. Press it. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Hopefully everybody is staying safe and staying healthy out there. Be kind to each other, as my man Chris Chouse always says on our podcast. Have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.